All right, everybody. Thanks for joining us. This is the fourth, I believe, virtual community meeting. We've done several of these now. So regarding the Wedgewood-Houston Chestnut Hill UDO and associated zone changes, it's February 9th. I am going to give a brief explanation. This is for those that are audio only. This is Colby Sledge, the council member for District 17. I'm going to give just a brief sort of overview again of kind of the technical side of this about how to ask questions, what we're going to go through. And then I'll turn it over to Harriet Brooks, who you're familiar with from the planning department. And she is going to walk through what the planning commission will consider on Thursday. Reminder that that's this Thursday, and she'll have info on call-in and participation since it is a public hearing. So if you're an attendee, there are two ways to engage, ask questions. First is the Q&A box that's at the lower right-hand corner. It's a little question with a box in it. You can put your question there or your comment. Or if you want to ask a question over audio, you can raise your hand. There's a little hand box in that same area too. And what we'll do is we'll alternate between the two. And I'll call on the person if you want to ask audibly, and we'll have ITS make sure that you can get through. Okay, with that, Harriet, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. And thanks everyone for joining us here this afternoon. And for those of you who have stuck through several of these meetings, we appreciate your comments and your feedback during all of this. So I just wanted to give a brief kind of overview of kind of where we've been and where we're going. Today, as you know, is February 9th. So we deferred the UDO at the January 21st Metro Planning Commission. And so due to that, excuse my dog, it's scheduled to be heard on Thursday, February 11th. The bill for the UDO and the zone change was filed on January 22nd. On February 2nd, we had the first Metro college.
Is Harry, you there?
Sorry, if y'all could give me just a second.
Yeah, that's fine. I'll keep going through, and once you jump back on, I'll so as y'all know, we've gone through, like I said, we've gone through several community meetings on this. You can see on the screen the feedback and revision process, starting back in the planning study engagement from 2017 to 2019. And then that there have been several meetings since. I did want to note that, like Harriet said, that the Planning Commission meeting has been deferred to this Thursday, to February 11th. And part of that you'll see on the recommendations is the recommendation to Planning Commission will include pending legislation being moved to that April 6th date. You'll remember from our last conversation, we talked about the possibility of doing something like that to enable people some more time if they had a permit in process or they had been working on getting things together to file. I've had about a half dozen of those instances. Some people who have been able to go ahead and resolve their permit issues, a couple people who are working through the system. So what you can see on the screen there is that pending legislation, where it typically would have been where it typically is after one reading at council and then a public hearing, it'll be recommended as a condition to the Planning Commission. So that's where we will be then. And I think Harriet has jumped back on.
Yes, apologies. It's the work from home life.
No worries at all. I was just mentioning the April 6th date, but otherwise we didn't go over anything else.
Yes. Yes, great. So yes, effective date of April 6th will be a part of the staff's recommendation to the Planning Commission. I just wanted to briefly go over kind of where we have been in terms of the feedback and revision process. The main part of the visioning and goals for this was done from 2017 to 2019 with the Wedgewood-Houston Chestnut Hill planning study. And so this UDO feedback process is really just meant to guide the UDO as an implementation tool of that study. We weren't trying to create a new vision, but rather provide some standards for technical guidance. So the 2019 planning study was adopted in October of 2019. And then we worked for a while, for several months, on kind of the research and analysis, drafting the plan, drafting the UDO document. And then we began the feedback and revision process in December. So since then, we've had 4 virtual public meetings. This being the 4th, we've had 2 steering committee meetings and 3 rounds of revisions on the document. So you can see that we would have a posted draft and have a few meetings and be able to incorporate that feedback before another draft is posted. So this has been although intensive kind of process, it's been fairly robust in terms of the guidance and feedback and revision that we normally see for these kinds of documents. So for this Thursday's Planning Commission meeting, staff is recommending approval with 2 conditions. One is the removal of 4 properties on First Avenue South that were not meant to be included, and then somehow kind of made it this far in the process before we realized it. And then also adherence to an effective date of April 6, 2021, following Metro Council passage and the mayor's signature. And as Councilmember Sledge noted, the reason for this effective date, having it in April instead of at the second council meeting, was really just to give people an extra few weeks in order to get their building permits in or get their short-term rental permits in. People had expressed some concerns that they were kind of in the middle of the process, and so we wanted to give some extra buffer room there. And then lastly, and I'll conclude this really short kind of presentation, is I just wanted to really encourage you to watch the live meeting on Thursday. Begins at 4. You can watch it live via Comcast, our M&N live stream, and you'll see the various channels up here. And also, the deadline has passed to send in email comments. It was at 3 p.m. today. However, you can still call in live directly to the meeting if you would like to voice your support or your opposition. This phone number is only in service during the meeting, so you can't call ahead of time. But if you choose to do so, if you'd like to call in support or opposition, you'll be given 2 minutes to speak. You'll state your name, address, whether you're for or against it, and then you'll receive a 30-second warning. And just so everyone is clear, we have discontinued the voicemail comment option that was available earlier in the kind of pandemic virtual days, just because we were having so many technical difficulties with those. So, so really your option to comment for this Thursday's public review meeting is to call in live during the meeting. And lastly, I'd just like to say thank you again for attending tonight, and for all of you that have worked with us through this process. You can view the latest draft of the document at WHCHstudy.nashville.gov. I would encourage you to do that. Also, if you have any questions regarding the document, you can email me personally, harriet.brooks@nashville.gov, or the UDO's email address, which is WHCHUDO@nashville.gov. And with that, I will turn it back to the council member. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Harriet. So we'll dive in on a couple of quick questions. Harriet, since you've got the slideshow still up, Buck Snyder had a question. He said, what properties on First Avenue South are included in the amendment? I think what he's asking is, could you put up those properties again that are being removed?
Sorry.
And I'll give that's fine. I'll give yeah.
These maps are incorrect. They're from an old version, so those aren't even. So it's 1302, 1304, 1306, and 1308 First Avenue South. They're in the very southeastern corner, south of Hart Avenue. And we had agreed that we would not include properties that didn't touch Hart, south of Hart, and so we needed to remove those.
Great. Thanks. And then Dwayne Cuthbertson asked, can you all show, this is an issue we've had before, can you all show who else is on the WebEx? Can't see any other attendees. We've been having some WebEx issues today and this week, just to be real with everybody. Sometimes those attendees show up and sometimes they don't. I am happy to tell you everybody who's on right now. So I'm going to run through that list real quick because I know we've had questions about kind of attendees and everything. So folks who are on are Andrew Donchez, sorry if I mispronounced anybody's name, by the way, Andrew Ringy, Brad Forster, Buck Snyder, Callie Lee, Caroline Wilkes, Cynthia Hardy, Clay, Derek Milner, Dwayne Cuthbertson, Ed Branding, Eric Malo, Gina Crawley, Jonathan Vick, Joshua Baxter, Justin Caldwell, Justice Thomas, Kyle Yates, Manuel Zeitlin, Michael Fay, Neil Doherty, Ryan Long, William Smallman, and then your panelists obviously are myself, Joni Williams from Planning is listening in, and Harriet Brooks, who you just met, and then Brandon Ward from ITS, who's making all this possible. That's I did want to let people know as we kind of see if there are any more questions right now. We did have another steering committee meeting today at lunchtime. Went through this exact same presentation, went through some more questions that folks had. Some of it was related, some of it's sort of some of the same technical stuff we've been going through. I do want to reiterate, as we have on every call, is that, and Harriet, do you mind putting the timeline slide back up? I think it was slide 3. Great. That, all throughout this process, there's still the opportunity for input, because this is, a zoning and land use bill, or two bills together. There are the opportunities for, tweaks and amendments to make sure that we're kind of trying to incorporate as much as possible that's still within the spirit of the UDO and the rezoning. So just a reminder that obviously things don't end Thursday. I mean, there's even another public hearing. That's the Metro Council public hearing on March 2nd. So we'll continue having conversations. We don't have another meeting set yet. I imagine we'll probably have at least probably another steering committee meeting, but we'll have some sort of other meeting between now and the end of this timeline. So, just wanted to make sure folks knew what was going on. I'm trying to check. Just want to make sure there weren't any other questions, but it seems like that's kind of where things are. Oh, Harry, do you want to, I think you mentioned this on the last slide on the site, the draft with what I'm calling the track changes draft is up. And then I think you had mentioned that we'll probably, we will have a clean draft up at some point in the next week or so.
Correct. That is correct. So we do have, well, I will say it is the almost latest draft. It is missing one standard, but we have sent that to the web team, and hopefully they will be updating it as soon as possible. The one standard that the draft online is missing is the 5-foot rear setback. We are changing the rear setback from 20 feet to 5 feet. So the draft online is not showing that. It is a track changes draft, so it's showing everything that we have changed throughout this public review process. It has strikeouts for everything we've taken out, and then in blue text for things that have been added throughout this process. And as the council member mentioned, we will be providing a cleaned up version that kind of a final version or a cleaned up version for people, so just to make it easier to digest, because I know it can be hard to read through all of those track changes.
There we go. Dwayne Cuthbertson mentioned actually just got updated and shows 5-foot rear setback standard now. So great.
Great. Okay.
Joshua Baxter commented, we have had some great community Zoom meetings. They have been productive. Everybody seems to want the UDO to be successful. The biggest comment most people have is to have a Zoom meeting with the councilman to have a fluid discussion about the UDO. Is this possible? The short answer is yes. In fact, I and Harriet and members of the planning department attended SNAP meeting the last week, I want to say, where we did have that sort of back and forth, and people were asking. I know it was moderated. It was a SNAP's meeting that we were invited to, so they moderated it. But yeah, this has been the intent the whole time, is to be able to have this feedback, be able to get through it, and get those details in. So yes, of course, I'm available. If folks want to set up another conversation, we'll take a look at calendars and see what we can do. William Smallman asks, requirements call for rear access is required for projects over 3 units. This does not match adopted planning policy, as alley loading is only mentioned for following building types, urban, industrial, mixed use, live, work. Can we change the rule? We got into this a little bit on the steering committee meeting as well. Ariel, do you want to
Sure.
kind of give an update of what we talked about there?
Yeah, so over the past several weeks, we have had many conversations and back and forth with Public Works about the UDO and about the requirements and kind of the infrastructure limitations that exist in these areas. And so after that back and forth, it was determined that we needed to keep the alley requirement for units, for properties with 4 or more units. We were able to, find some middle ground on reducing the required widths for driveways, for duplexes and triplexes. But as it stands right now, we are going to still require that alley access for 4+ units. And I'll note, in addition to that, just that if there is a specific site situation, that if you have the ability to do kind of something that works like an alley behind a property or something that's specific to your site, specific to your project, we could go through the modification process. But for right now, that standard's going to have to stick.
Thanks, Harriet. Kyle Yates asks, when building front to back structures, does the rear unit need to be directly behind the front unit as looking from the street? The document seems to read that this is the rule going with the UDO. Great, thanks.
I guess I'm trying to understand what exactly you mean by directly. It does need to fit within the side setbacks of the primary structure. So if that helps answer it, then yes.
Got it. Okay. There was a follow-up question on the alley loading that said what department required the alley loading?
It was a strong recommendation from Public Works. And at other factors, we determined that was the best route to go.
Got it. A follow-up on alley stuff. If you keep the alley requirement, this is from Dwayne Cuthbertson, if you keep the alley requirement, that will result in a number of subdivisions on these larger assemblies of properties, which will then result in far more driveways to the public street and will likely miss out on more flexible housing types. So I want to take this for a minute because this came up in the steering committee as well, because there appears to be kind of a group of property owners who have decided that they will subdivide if they can't get certain design standards. Harriet, can you walk through, we talked a little bit about the process of subdivision in the steering committee meeting. Can you just walk through that briefly, what it means to apply for subdivision?
Sure, and I will say I am no expert on the new subdivision regulations. I will say that we have added standards in the UDO that you cannot subdivide and create a parcel with a frontage that's less than 40 feet in width. And that matches the new subdivision infill regulations for T4 neighborhood evolving. So we changed that to match that policy. And then we also added language that if a subdivision occurs that results in infill lots that are less than 50 feet in width, then shared access must be provided. So shared driveways. And that also matches the the new subdivision regulations. In terms of process, from what I understand, the subdivision process is very technical. So it basically just looks at kind of the black and white standards or regulations and if you're allowed to do something or not, but it does not, it looks to the UDO to provide anything above and beyond that in terms of design standards.
Got it, thanks. Eric Melo asked, latest version of document seems to have removed the restricted building types chart. Is there anything new on types such as live work units being allowed within certain areas?
So the building type section was removed at the request from lots of people who were saying that it was just kind of like adding a complicating factor to the document. And so those standards were kind of moved into other sections, mostly into the character area sections where it's talking about setback and that sort of thing. There is nothing new on types such as live work units.
Got it. Okay. Buck Snyder asks, how does the UDO affect rezoning requests? Is the UDO draft the primary document that guides planning's approach to rezonings? I'll take that to begin with as far as rezonings go, because we talked a little bit about this in the steering committee meeting today too. So, obviously this is a big undertaking, right, with the UDO and the rezoning affecting two neighborhoods. There have been some questions about sort of what happens after that. In previous UDOs and not quite rezonings of this scale, but of other rezonings I've undertaken, there's an opportunity to see how that framework works. The good thing in this situation is it's kind of coming in the middle of my term. So there's a couple more years that we can talk through, hey, what do we think about, well, what came up in the steering committee, for instance, neighborhood centers, right? We've talked about that on pre-meetings. What are the opportunities there? What would those processes look like? When it comes to rezoning, say, a single parcel or whatever it might be in these areas, I can tell you that I would be, kind of disinclined to go through that process so soon after the UDO and rezoning. But we always have opportunities to talk through a lot of these different issues and see kind of how the nature of this evolves. I don't know if planning has anything to add to that, because I think y'all would still have the same sort of standard as far as looking at whether a rezoning is appropriate or not. It would just be under a slightly different context. Is that fair to say, Harriet? Okay.
Yes.
Thanks. Great. Thanks, Buck, for the question. Let's see. William Smallman says, please list all concerns mentioned by the stakeholders meeting today. Also, what changes did they ask for? Please explain in detail. So I've gone over a lot of those. I'm just gonna I'm just gonna push back a little on this because this is a steering committee meeting. So steering committee members come from different backgrounds. There are people on this call who were in the steering committee. If you want to talk with them about what concerns or standards or questions that they had, in addition to the ones that we've already mentioned, we talked through just sort of the generics of this, and then we got very technical on some other issues. One of the things I remember was rear setback questions, which I think got addressed actually in that draft update. So we wanted to make sure that occurred. And then the alley loading question and the driveways came up previously. Folks also asked about the maintenance of the 20 feet between buildings, which is still in that draft. So those are a few things that I can recall off the top of my head from that 90-minute meeting. But like I said, steering committee, they had different approaches, different thoughts through that, just like at the SNAP meeting, for instance, that they would have had different approaches and thoughts. So, all right, Dwayne Cuthbertson, still don't get the need to separate front to back structures by 20 feet. It's not uncommon to have less than 20 feet between front and back dwellings. I understand the 5-foot rear yard provides flexibility. It seems arbitrary since I could just connect the homes. Harry, do you want to talk about how the 20 feet relates to the rear setback piece?
Sure. So the current zoning for RM20 necessitates a 20-foot rear setback for residential properties. And in order to provide a little bit more flexibility in the UDO, we have reduced that to 5 feet. So, but we have also kept this standard in there that requires a 20-foot separation between front to back structures. And the reason for that is really about kind of urban pattern and light and air accessibility to these structures. You know, I think it's just about, you know, trying to create a pattern that is contextual and is also allowing for a nice kind of urban environment.
Great, thanks. All right, I'm trying to make sure. Oh, I see Kyle Yates has a question, has his hand raised, so he might be wanting to clarify on his previous question. Brandon, can we get Kyle? Hey, Kyle, I think you can go ahead.
Hey, guys, thanks. Yeah, Harriet, just to clarify, so I asked a question about front to back structures, and maybe I should have written in there a little bit more, but it's specifically on garages or maybe carriage houses that are detached relative to page 13 on the document. And it reads, for lots without alley access where a primary structure directly blocks the view of the rear garage from the street, the doors of the rear garage may face the front. So who determines, like, at what point standing on the street looking for that? And the reason I ask is, like, my personal house on Hamilton would not be able to be built because of the way the garage sits on the lot moving forward. So how do we go through? So the garage would need to sit directly behind the house where you could not see it from the street. Is that correct?
Where I would say where you could not see it if you were standing on the street directly in front of the house. If you were, you know, obviously you get into vision angles and that kind of thing. If you're not standing directly in front of the house and you can see the garage, I think that's probably okay. But it's just meant to be, the structure needs to be within the fit within the side setbacks of the primary structure. Does that answer your question? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I guess I'm more concerned of trying to figure out logistics of parking and the best way to utilize the building envelope. So my house, for example, the driveway goes down the left side of the property directly into the detached garage, where it would have to be offset, even though it fits within the 5-foot side setback, it would have to be offset probably another 7 to 8 feet, which just makes logistical issues pulling in and out of the garage versus pulling straight in. So, you know, my question was, does that need to be directly behind the structure? And I guess so from the from the language on there.
Yes.
Great. Thanks, Kyle. All right, I'm going back to the Q&A box just to make sure I don't miss anything. We did have this question at the steering committee too. Dwayne Cuthbertson asks, can porches extend into front setback? If not, I'm afraid many will not want to lose 6 feet more feet of setback for the house and will forgo the porch. Harry, you want to give just a summary of what we talked about porches?
Sure. Yeah, so that was mentioned in the steering committee meeting today. It was the first time that I had heard that comment in these several weeks, and I think that's an interesting idea that we could explore. Obviously, it won't make it into the document for the Planning Commission on Thursday, but it's possible that could be something in an through amendment of the document or something like that.
Yeah. William Smallman states the planning policy calls for continuing the current development pattern in District 2A. No homes have been, I think, been built in 2A with 20 feet between front to back houses. The 20 feet spacing rule should be removed to allow the development pattern to continue. Harry, can you speak to what the current setbacks are and what I believe is referred, in the 2A?
I'll just say, I understand that there are several people on the call that have concerns about this 20-foot spacing rule. I'll also say that we have received concerns from other people, we've received comments in support of the 20-foot spacing rule from other people. And so we are trying to balance, both sides and accommodate what we think is the best best decision and most appropriate fit for the document.
Yeah, and I will reiterate, part of that conversation or the bulk of that conversation had been kind of how do the rear setbacks and the 20-foot in between work in tandem. So, Drew, hold on, we got about 5 that came in at once. Give me a second. There we go. Drew Dawes, I'm concerned about the height difference between plots at the top of Fall Hamilton being able to be built 15 feet taller than houses further down the street due to the huge difference between Fall Hamilton and Merritt Southgate. In my case, it's a 19-foot difference. I think this is about topography. Harry, do you think that's what we're talking about here?
It definitely sounds like it's both topography and just that there are
areas.
There have been more houses in the northern part of Fall Hamilton, I think, that are taller, that have already been redeveloped and are taller. I guess I would say I understand that concern. We've tried to address it the best we can within the UDO, but I understand that it might not be perfect.
Yeah, and just I will say just a reminder from going back in the study plan, there are different development patterns called for from the study plan within these sub-districts. So from that standpoint, that's one of the differences. And a pretty big one. I don't want to play it down. Drew clarified, no, it's about averages and the lower restriction. I'm a little confused. Drew, if you want to get on the audio, maybe we can talk through that. The follow-up question was, sorry, having to open boxes. No, it's about averages and the lower restrictions in Merritt Southgate. I can't build a house the same height as my current house or as wide, which, yeah, I'd have to check on that. In the meantime, I saw Cynthia Hardy, whose name I hadn't seen up here before. Are you saying, I think this question is for me, are you saying that rezoning will not be considered at this time, or is there a particular requirement to rezone? So just as a reminder, this is rezoning everyone. So like everyone's getting rezoned at once. I think what I was referring to is, if we go through this rezoning, then it would be unlikely for me as a council member to turn around and rezone a property that was just rezoned. That's what I'm referring to. In other words, giving time for the new standards to be implemented, tested, see what's working, see if things need to be tweaked, and then we go through that process again. And as I said in the steering committee, there are sort of outside factors too for both myself and for planning. I have, obviously I represent a whole district. So there are other things down the line as well. There are other projects, other efforts in other neighborhoods. In fact, there's another effort, or there's another community engagement effort that will take place with these same communities right after this process, which relates to the Fairground Speedway and its impact there. So that's, that working through as many issues as we can in this window of time, while still acknowledging, hey, there might be things we need to do a little bit deeper dive on in a few months or whenever it might be. Just trying to make sure that everybody knows kind of what that reality is. So, let's see here. I'm gonna see if Drew raised his hand. Just a second. Okay, I don't see Drew's hand up. Kyle, your hand's still up. I think that might be old. I see William's hand is up. Brandon, can you unmute William Smallman? Thanks.
Hey guys. So one of the things I'm hearing that just concerns me is so much of this document is supposed to be based on the planning policy that we spent so much effort on and time. And it seems like some of these things are, but some of the answers we're getting are based on neighbor input instead of the planning policy. I'm referring mostly to the 20-foot spacing, but the policy definitely calls for continuing the development pattern and continuing that. And we've made other changes based on that same logic. And it seems like this one fits right into the same category, but we're not paying attention to the policy on that one for some reason. I'd just love to hear why, and if we can focus more on that policy to get that one worked on a little bit better.
On the policy issue, I mean, again, I think I'll like kind of turn back to what the current policy is, because I think we're making changes to the current policy in different ways. But Harry, do you want to talk again about kind of what the setbacks are and the policy within the current framework?
Sure. So I'll say, through this process, we are balancing both policy and, and the engagement, the review process that we've been going through, and trying to, find a compromise between a lot of these different objectives, along with the kind of infrastructure and site-specific issues that we have. So I'll just start there. In terms of the policy document itself, the Wedgewood-Houston Chestnut Hill UDO document does have overarching key issues and goals, which have to do with maintaining the character. I know that we have not totally gone in that direction with with Merritt Southgate. It's an overarching goal of the whole planning study, not specifically that portion of that character area. So we're trying to find a balance between what is good urban design practice. And we understand that there are some points of contention where the desires of, say, developers are not going to be the same as residential homeowners. And so when that happens, we have to come up with our best guidance, considering the policy, both the planning study, but also T4 neighborhood evolving planning policy, what the community character manual says, all of those kinds of things, and try to come up with the best balance. And so that is what we have done here. I would be interested in hearing an argument for how a less than 20-foot separation causes a better urban design environment. But besides that, like I said, we're trying to work through this and provide the best result we can given the policy that we have.
Is that a conversation we can have now about how it provides a better urban environment? Is this an open dialogue? Because I think there might be other people, especially in 2A, on the Merritt Southgate, that might it would be great. These are the kind of conversations I love if everybody has open dialogue. So is that okay to do?
I think it's fine to do that. I think a point that I want to kind of emphasize here is, I'm trying to get to as many folks as possible. We have just a couple of questions left in here. I'd like to loop back to that because Drew's trying to get his question answered and missed his unmute button. So I want to get there. And
yeah, you want to put it back towards the end of the conversation then? Maybe?
Yeah, sure. We'll loop back to it. Brandon, can you unmute Drew Dawes, please? I think we just missed him the first time.
Hey there. So my main concern is the high average restrictions. And seemingly if I wanted to develop my house or anything like in a different or another house onto my plot, the parking restrictions mixed with the height restrictions means that I can't build anything as wide as my current house or as tall as my current house. And with the huge, massive amounts of parking, the widths that we have to have, the parking plots, the fact that we can't do anything at the front of the property means that the only thing you could really do on the Fall Hamilton lots will be do a front and back large house. So for kind of more smaller units, it just doesn't work out as a feasible possibility. So my main concern is the fact as well as the height. If I can build up to 26 feet, but the house is like three, four houses up the street, which have already got the topography in their favor, can build 19 feet taller than me. Like, that's just going to look insane. It's going to look, all the top of the street is going to be crazy high houses, 3 stories. And then Fall Hamilton, as well as Chestnut Hill, will probably be one of the only neighborhoods in the whole of the city that'll be limited to less than 3 stories. So, this is kind of, it's a bit crazy to me. Why I have to endure somebody else's decision of how low they wanted to build a house then affects my plot for the rest of time.
Thanks, Drew. So I want to go through because I think I'm hearing a couple different pieces there.
I mean, yeah, there's a lot, yeah. But...
Yeah, no, that's okay. Harry, do you want to talk through? I think what we're discussing mainly is height in the Fall Hamilton area, if I understand correctly. So do you want to just go through what those standards are?
Yes. So I'll just say that the height in the Fall Hamilton, those standards go back to a specific recommendation in the 2019 planning study that called for a contextual infill overlay for Fall Hamilton and for Chestnut Hill. So that vision really came out of that 2019 planning study. And so our objective with the UDO is to create an implementation tool for that vision. And so we did try several different ways of trying to include topography as part of the kind of calculation for height. And to be honest, it got really complicated really quickly and it seemed like it would be a standard that was prohibitive in terms of just people trying to figure it out. And so we went back to just the standards that are more based off of the contextual overlay that Metro already has that exists, and based it solely on the height of existing adjacent homes plus 6 feet or 8 feet.
Yeah, which is no good really. But if it'd be much clearer if obviously there's a set height that we'll work off from the topography, because obviously that's where the foundation is going to be based. Like in Merritt Southgate, it's 45 feet straight away, easily done. No questions asked, no confusion. I just don't see why we can't do the same in Fall Hamilton and say if you build to 2 stories, 2.5 stories, you get 30 feet. If you try and build to 3 stories, 35 feet. That's a lot easier than taking into account averages of homes that aren't existing homes. It's not an old house that I'm talking about. It's a newer build. So it's not like it's been here for 80 years like the rest of the houses. It's somebody's decision to do something quick and cheap. And then that's going to it's going to impact me massively. And then that's going to affect values of plots, and I just don't think it's a fair way of assessing each parcel. We should have a set height and then everyone can play to those same rules rather than giving other people different rule books. You know, I just don't think it's fair.
Thanks, Drew. I think I understand what you're getting at. And we're trying to, again, this is going back to, trying to create a policy that's in using the tools we have, creating a policy that reflects the guidelines or determinations or feedback we got from the 2019 study plan. So I hear what you're saying. I've been going through your the email that you sent as well to try to make sure I'm reviewing that as best I can. I know you sent it over to planning as well. Okay, we got a couple of questions from people who haven't asked one before. Is Fall Hamilton the only neighborhood in the heart of the city where we will have a contextual height and only 2 stories? If not, what other neighborhood has this? So before I address other neighborhoods, Harriet, what's the height on Fall Hamilton?
Sure, I'm gonna pull up the document really fast.
Okay, while you do that, I'll give you a sense of other neighborhoods that I've experienced in the district that have heights of that. Maybe the best example is a lot of 12 South. So a lot within the Waverly Belmont conservation overlay, which covers a significant portion of 12 South. I think it's more than 700 parcels. Has the design standard that I think is actually stronger, or I would say stricter than that, obviously, because it's a conservation overlay. You'll see similarly in the most southern portion of that same neighborhood, it's actually still in the sort of Clayton and Gale Lane area where the Belmont Hillsborough conservation overlay was applied there. Edge Hill, most of the existing housing stock in Edge Hill is under similar height restrictions, and those are just all in the district that I represent. So there are a lot of other overlays and in the urban core that you see, and I mean most of East Nashville is under some sort of either historic conservation or contextual overlay that has those similar, if not stricter, standards. So, Harriet, do you want to go through that now? That's my 45-second off the cuff spiel.
Yeah, sure. I'll echo that. Just that this is definitely not the only neighborhood, but the maximum height for Fall Hamilton, the average height of adjacent residential structures plus 6 feet to a maximum of 2 stories and 30 feet for single family and duplexes. And then for 3+ unit multifamily, the average height of adjacent residential structures plus 8 feet to a maximum of 2.5 stories and 35 feet.
Great, thank you. Let's see here. I'm gonna go back to Cynthia. She said, I'm here to obtain an understanding of what's going on in the community. I was also appointed to this meeting to request application for rezoning of my single family to multifamily. How do I go about doing that? Cynthia, the easiest thing to do here is just email me with your address that you're talking about, so I can give you more specific context there, and I'll loop planning into if that's appropriate. But if my email address is just colby.sledge, I think you've got it, but colby.sledge.bill.gov, and let me know what address you're talking about. Buck Snyder had asked, I have a property on the periphery of the UDO. Can I opt out of the UDO? We've talked about opting out on previous meetings as well. So as closely as we can, we're trying to hew to the sub-districts that were created. If there's and we have talked about before about not creating basically just spot zoning and donut holes throughout overlays, which typically overlays are completely contiguous. So if there's an area that you're asking about, I think you're asking somewhere on the north end of First Avenue, but send it over. But it's unlikely, because the only sort of opt-outs that we've had at this point are the industrial properties that Harriet just mentioned that were not meant to be in there, quite frankly, to begin with. We removed the mixed use portion that was a transition over on Merritt Avenue because there seemed to be a lot of concern about a different building type and a different standard. So that will just have to be addressed in some sort of future planning effort. And then the one property I think people are familiar with at Pillow and Merritt, which is undergoing an SP process, which it started before the UDO draft came out. So Andrew Donchez asks, is creation of a mixed-use neighborhood center in Merritt Southgate, hold on guys, focused on the Martin, Merritt, Hamilton, Hagen area, a possibility in this UDO or in the future? So I'm going to answer that broadly in the sense that, yes, the creation of a mixed-use neighborhood center in Merritt Southgate is possible in the future under the guidelines of this UDO. Sorry that it's like sort of like an answer but not an answer. Yes, it's possible in the future under this UDO. The issues regarding Merritt Southgate and creating a neighborhood center in this process have been sort of multi-faceted, so I'll try to go through them in the clearest possible way. We mentioned this on the steering committee meeting too. I had actually reached out, that very property I just mentioned, the Pillow Merritt one, had reached out to the applicant to see if they preferred to consider a neighborhood center at the Pillow Merritt intersection, since two of those intersection corners have already been redeveloped. The applicant looked at it, said no, they preferred to continue their SP route. So that was one option that was kind of shut down. As far as in these other areas, you know, I would say that, yeah, there are possibilities for these different ones, but that's going to be a separate conversation because it's probably going to require a different mix of uses that are under the guidelines of a neighborhood center, density, form, etc. But I would like to have those conversations I would like the community to set the standards for those conversations and help determine where they would want to see those neighborhood centers. I will tell you, I have gotten a few emails suggesting locations of neighborhood centers. We went through those on the last public meeting. One of the things I struggled with was a couple of the suggestions were outside, or at least part of the proposed neighborhood center would be outside of the boundaries. Those were on Wedgewood. And then I got proposals that were, quite frankly, not actually centers. They were just blocks of parcels on one or the other side of the street. And those are the kinds of things where, again, I would prefer that we start to have a community conversation on those, where the guidelines for a neighborhood center are already available to people, and then that they can drill down into having a conversation about what they want those to look like, where they would be, what they want to achieve from those, because I think I've heard different outcomes that people have wanted. So yes, it's possible in the future. What this UDO I'm trying to approach from a Merritt Southgate perspective on neighborhood centers is enable the guidelines, enable the conversation to begin, but then get clarity on that for the future. And just as a reminder to folks, there are a couple of neighborhood centers that are proposed in the UDO for Chestnut Hill. That's because there was more, quite frankly, cohesion over where those neighborhood centers would go. Let's see. Josh, to answer your question is yes, we have started the Q&A. I can't respond to you in the box. So I'm trying to look back through the questions. I don't see, I'm going to flip to the hands real quick. Oh, okay, we got a couple of people who haven't asked questions yet. Brandon, can you unmute Manuel Zeitlin, please?
Can you hear me?
Gotcha.
Hey, Colby, Harriet. I have actually two questions or comments. The first one is my daughter Anna lives at 511 Hamilton, and she was saying that the dadu we built in the backyard there, the height of it wouldn't be allowed under the current restrictions because it's taller than the front house. So that one might be a good one for you guys to drive by and take a look at, because I think something that comes along with that 20-foot spacing is that you, standing on the street, you sort of get a forced perspective. So something that's physically taller doesn't look a whole lot, doesn't overwhelm, because of that distance separation, it doesn't overwhelm the front house at all. And that seems like it sort of seems, just to me, seems like a good scaled fit, and it allows the ability to get a little bit more square footage for somebody in that dadu situation, which supports the whole idea of the missing middle, of trying to provide that option. And then the main thing I wanted to discuss was getting back to the question I think William maybe asked earlier about the allowing center driveways, I guess, in situations where there are multifamily units without an alley. And Johnny knows this is one of my pet peeves, so I'm not really going to get into it. But Harriet, from your answer, it sounds like that that Public Works is shaping planning policies, is shaping the design of this UDO as compared to having the goals of the UDO shape the design of it. And in this case, I wanted just to get back for a minute, just to the idea of the missing middle. That when Colby laid out that seemed to be one of the really strong ideas, that here's an opportunity to provide a missing middle ranging from 2 to 10 units. And all of a sudden, in a large part of this neighborhood, Southgate area, without alleys, we're limiting that possibility for that sort of middle group of housing types. So I just think it might get back to that idea of providing a big chunk of that missing middle, which was a goal, if you reconsider the idea of having, say a 10 unit or, quadplex or a 10 unit development be able to enter off the street. And in doing so, the reality is those are going to be hard to pull off for developers to start with because or individuals, because they're stacked flats are a lot more expensive to build than townhouses. And, we're a little worried that we're just going to end up with a lot of expensive, 2-unit townhouses or 2-unit front to back or expensive front to back units, where if you can get more units on a lot, you might be able to get the size of the units down and the prices down. But if we don't have the option to do that, you might have some unintended consequences of actually having higher price housing than more affordable housing for the neighborhood. I hope that makes sense.
No, that makes sense, Manuel. And I think, Harriet, I don't know if there's any more to add from what you mentioned on driveways and alleys previously. I'll be real direct with you. Like, yeah, Public Works has been determining planning policy for a long time in this city. Like, just that, and so I think that's an issue. And another issue is the reality that this neighborhood that we're discussing here, the Wedgewood-Houston one versus Chestnut Hill, which has a more built-out alley network. This neighborhood was outside of the city boundaries before the city-county merger, and we are still 50 years behind on infrastructure there. And that's going to be true. That would be true of this rezoning or not, right? Like, there are opportunities that exist for plots on alley loading from a design perspective, if not an entitlement perspective, a design perspective, that are available that aren't available to houses with no alleys or unimproved alleys. And if you can point me to somewhere that Public Works improved an alley in the last 6 years of its own volition, I'd love to see an example. But
we actually did a project on Richland. It's probably 20 years ago, where we basically had a centered one drive coming off, I think it was Richland, coming out, is it Richland or Central, but coming off the street, and then a group of like cluster houses around it. I'm sure a lot of the cluster developments kind of have that form without having necessarily an alley to access them. So anyway, I just think in terms of looking at that idea, are there opportunities to get more of these sort of 4, 5, 6, up to 10 unit options in the neighborhood as compared to just duplexes or triplexes? Being able to come off a street and eliminate some drives may give you a good option.
Yeah, I agree. There is the modification process could help on some of that. I don't want to promise anything, but I think could be an option. Thanks, man. I appreciate it. Let's go to Clay Atkinson. Can we unmute Clay, please? We've got multiple Clays, so I want to make sure we get the right one. The one with his hand up. I'll put it that way.
Hey, thanks, Colby. You guys hear me okay?
Yeah, we got you.
Great, thanks. So I'm going to follow up on a question that Buck Snyder had raised on that north side of the north side of First Avenue. So just some clarification. It looks like that, that part is being treated as Chestnut Hill. And I know back in 2019, 2018, we worked really hard with staff to get those particular properties that are right on First Avenue, get the CCM changed from neighborhood evolving to corridor, given, what's going on right across the street with the envision process, given, the how major of a bus line that is, right there on First Avenue. So kind of glancing back at this stuff, just wanted to kind of get you guys' thoughts on why that northern corridor is getting treated with what looks like the same residential character is like more of the Chestnut Hill. I know that density here makes sense. It seems like staff agreed. They went ahead with the CCM change. So just kind of seeing like, is there an option to either make those northern parts either part of the Second Avenue corridor, which seems like it has, kind of the design standards that are sort of more appropriate for those conditions I'm talking about. Just want to get you guys' thoughts on why you chose to make it part of Chestnut Hill instead of Second Avenue.
Thanks, Clay. I think Harriet's, as you can see, is pulling up the parcel viewer, and you're mentioning First Avenue South, those properties at the northern tip.
Right, the ones north of the school. So there's probably 10 or 12 properties. There's that triangle property, and then so it's basically everything that's in that kind of striped corduroy color. I believe that's the corridor CCM code. And part of my thinking in this is, I know with what's literally going right across the street are those 5 and 6 story buildings, as part of the envision process. So just trying to figure out if there's a way that, those properties that the community character manual has already approved can kind of complement that corridor so we don't end up with something that's, residential scale right there on the corridor.
Got it. It might, in a commitment to not go parcel by parcel, Harriet, do you want to follow up with Clay and Buck on those? Okay, you're muted, Harriet.
Sure, I can follow up with y'all on that. I think the short answer was just sticking to the character areas from the 2019 planning study was the reasoning behind that. But I can, from looking at this, I can definitely see your argument. So
Great. Yep. Good deal. Follow up on those, and again, this is a reminder that throughout this process, I think everybody on this call knows this, but throughout this process, there's the opportunity for amendment, the opportunity for tweaks and changes. So thank you for bringing that up. I'm going to do one more. If you've asked a question, you've still got your hand up. If you'll take it down so it helps clear it off on my menu. The last question I've got for audio, then going back to the Q&A box, is Josh Helmer. Brandon, can you help unmute him?
Hey, thank you. I apologize, I was late, so I don't know if this was asked already or not, but I think one of our neighbors had maybe a private meeting with planning where it looked like the pending legislation date was changed to April 6th. Wondering if that has happened, and if so, if that asterisk at the bottom of the page that I saw speaking about the pending legislation has been removed because it was kind of conflicting information. April 6th, but then kicking in after first reading.
Yeah, the short answer is yes. It's so the slideshow at the beginning that Harriet's showing the Planning Commission, the staff recommendation is approval with a condition that pending legislation would be April 6th. So yes, I'm not sure if the study page has been updated. We actually talked about that this week, but the slideshow, it may be hard for Harriet to get back because I know sometimes those browser windows don't cooperate. But yes, April 6th is the pending legislation / enactment date.
Okay, and then will we continue to have these types of meetings between readings to kind of amend this thing until it's finalized?
Yeah, we're going to have additional meetings. I don't want to commit to any particular amendment per se, but yes, we'll continue to have these meetings. Want to, quite frankly, just want to do Thursday and make sure we've got everybody who wants to participate Thursday in, and then after Thursday, yes, we'll set a date for a new meeting between then and the March 2nd, the Metro Council public meeting. So yeah, there's a commitment to do that. Just want to make sure everybody knows we haven't set the date yet.
Okay, yeah, see that asterisk at the bottom there.
Right.
Kind of.
Yeah.
So here's the staff recommendation. So we're recommending adherence to an effective date of following Metro Council passage and the mayor's signature.
Okay.
And so
I apologize, I don't want to interrupt. Do we need to get rid of that asterisk at the bottom then, or it just seems like it's kind of conflicting information?
sure. Yes, we can get rid of that, and now we'll make sure it's updated on the website.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Josh. All right, guys, I'm going back to the Q&A box here. So, and I'm making sure I get questions that maybe haven't gone yet. We've got just a couple of comments here. There's a question on can we add language in 2A to allow for higher intensity in RM20 at key intersections even without a neighborhood center? Planning policy calls for higher density in 2A at prominent corners inside in 2A. I will go back to, again, if we're going to have specific conversations about intersections and neighborhood centers, then all that needs to be wrapped into one. Like that conversation about what the density is, what the uses are, what the desired outcomes are, need to be center specific, because given the guidelines of the neighborhood center and given what the community in one portion might want versus another portion, I've got to drill down a little bit more into that one. So no, I wouldn't be, for me at least, I wouldn't be suggesting greater density at a corner without having that conversation on creating a de facto neighborhood center without actually talking what the goals of the neighborhood center are. There's a couple people who are just kind of commenting to each other, so I won't repeat those, but thank y'all for having the conversation. So let's go back. So it's 5:10. We're scheduled to 5:30, just like the rest. Let's go back to the conversation that was mentioned earlier about policy, and I think it was the sort of 20-foot separations and things like that. So if y'all can work through, I mean, I want to try to do this in the most feasible way, and I see another hands up. So let me go back to the hands. So Dwayne Cuthbertson has his hand up. Can you unmute? Brandon, can you unmute Dwayne, please? Thank you.
Hey, Colby, Harriet, I really appreciate you guys putting this on. I just had a couple of thoughts. One, I wanted to kind of emphasize and encourage you guys to have this fluid conversation with us. I think most of us agree on the intent, like the broader ideas behind this UDO. Admittedly, I'm not talking to everybody in the neighborhood, but I've set up a few Zoom meetings, put it out on Nextdoor, just to meet neighbors and see what people think, and see if we can talk amongst ourselves and really understand the consequences of this UDO, and see if, at least in our minds, we can reconcile the standards in the UDO with the broader ideas that at least we think are communicated in the adopted plan. And it seems like we're almost there, but then there also seem like there are a handful of standards that, at least in my mind, are limiting and don't get us across the finish line. And so I think I would love to sit down with you guys and pencil it out, and okay, the standard says X, this is what I think it means to be. My fear is that without that back and forth dialogue and looking over a plan, we're going to end up with something that these guys, the few people in the Merritt Southgate section that really we're going to be relying on to implement this vision, because only a handful of folks own the majority of the lots that can still be redeveloped. So my fear is that without really kind of hashing out some of these standards, these guys are just going to take the path of least resistance, and they're going to build 2 big honking houses on those lots and go on down the road, and we end up with tons of driveways up and down these streets, and we don't get the missing middle housing. So that's my bigger statement, but I really do want to, hoping that we can have that fluid dialogue between now and when this thing actually gets adopted, because I think most of us want to get behind this and say, yeah, we want all of this to happen. So I'll just leave it there.
Thanks, Mike. Brandon, can you unmute Eric Malo?
Yes, hello. So to follow up on the 20-foot distance separation issue, I know that was set aside to come back to, and we talked about it in the steering committee meeting a little bit earlier today. I'm a little bit on the fence as to what's the best solution. I totally hear Harriet's points about proper and best urban form, having separation between houses and so forth. I put a comment in the Q&A there. Perhaps an option would be to do something like split the difference, compromise between the 5-foot setback and a 20-foot separation, and do something more like a 15-foot separation with a 10-foot setback. That's just one possibility to consider. That would put less space between the houses on a single lot, but it would put more separation between rear abutting properties where there aren't alleys. For example, now with a 5-foot setback, that potentially will create quite a few houses that are 10 feet apart from each other across a fence line, which I don't see as an improvement when the intent is to have 20-foot separation between houses on the same lot. So I think that's a little bit of a challenge, and maybe that's a compromise that would improve it. Additionally, in a bit of back and forth with somebody else here on texting, there's a thought of, if you had 2 units on a lot and they each have a garage to the interior of the lot, perhaps those could be closer than 20 feet where you have a carport or a garage. There's probably not a need to have that piece of the house 20 feet apart from the other unit. So there's so many variations on how to develop multiple units, and these distances are setting up very specific limitations. And sometimes I think there's unintended consequences, such as 10-foot distance between units at the rear. So I think perhaps just more conversation and discussion, consideration of those points.
Yeah, thank you for that. That's a really interesting analysis. And that kind of like the front porch comment, it's not something that we'll be able to include before the planning commission meeting, but I do think that is worthy of more conversation.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, Joe. Let's see, Josh, if you don't mind emailing that one, that would help, because I can get it. I can work on trying to break that down, because I think it's got a couple of parts to it. Let's see. Hold on, I'm working through. I see William says he has his hand up. I'm working through this, because sometimes it only displays. There we go. All right. Brandon, can you unmute William Smallman again?
Hey guys. So we had a short meeting last night, and this came up from Drew, who lives on Stewart, and I may just not understand the guideline or the rules here, but a front house and back house setup when there's no alley. So it will be a front driveway. The width of the back house, does it actually have to fit? Like, if, let's say hypothetically the front house is 30 feet wide, Does the back house have to be 30 feet wide and directly behind it, or could the back house be 40 feet wide as long as it meets the setbacks of the lot? Or when you say setback, I get confused when you talk about setbacks, I guess, is the thing. There's a setback is a side setback, and I get lost if we're talking about the setback of the front house being 15 feet off the side versus the required setback. So can the back house be wider than the front house?
No.
Okay. In that setup, it's pretty restrictive for people like Drew on Stewart because he's forced to have a front driveway. So his front house can be no more than, let's say, 28 feet wide or something. I don't have without doing a calculator, his front house will be more narrow than a house with an alley. And then that also makes his back house have to be more narrow than a house with an alley. So he's that was one of his big concerns last night. He's getting restricted on height, which is, I think he's voiced that. But with this restriction, he's also getting shrunk width wise for his back house if he builds one. And it seems like an added punishment just because he doesn't have an alley is how he felt. So I wanted to just share that. And that's something we talked about, and nobody else thought that was accurate, but I guess you're saying it is accurate that the back one has to be more narrow too. That seemed concerning. Can you share on if we can work on changing that to help alleviate some of those concerns?
Sure. Are you able to see the UDO page? I can't tell what I'm able to share or not right now.
Yes.
So these notes on carriage houses and rear structures, these come from the zoning code of use for detached accessory dwelling units. So that is something that I would have to kind of look into.
Well, I may be asking the question wrong. I'm sorry. Because not for carriage houses. Do you consider a second dwelling, like if someone's doing an HPR, like a front back detached structure? Is that a rear structure? Because that's the way I'm reading it. Is it's saying that a second home in the back is a rear structure also? So
yeah. Okay. Sorry, I was misunderstanding you.
Yeah. This could be an easy clarification that we may have just not understood.
So, well, now I'm starting to get confused. So my first interpretation in reading this is that it would need to fit within that 5-foot setback, not within the setback of the house with the actual lot kind of required minimum setback.
I think that alleviates a lot of concerns. If we could just make sure that's clear, because in that first page you showed, a rear house, a second dwelling in the back is a rear structure. It could be interpreted that way by someone down the road, 2 years from now with a different planner reviewing it, they're going to read it as a rear structure potentially. And that would create a lot of hiccups for people.
So let me just say, I don't want my comment tonight to be the final end all be all. I feel like I'll need to look more into this. But I will do that and take that comment into account.
Great, thanks, y'all. I think that's helpful to go through. So I'm going back. I think we're pretty close on the Q&A box. Eric, I'll read your comment. Just make sure people see it. It says, note on the front back house width issue. This limitation is especially concerned if we want to keep some of the existing front houses. So understood. All right. So we're at like 8 minutes left. What I do want to do, because I know we have some folks who maybe haven't been at every meeting or haven't seen the timeline again. Harriet, when you get the chance, can you throw up the page about how to participate Thursday for the Planning Commission. As many of you who have attended Planning Commission meetings before know, there's public comment period for everything that's not on the consent agenda. I know the department has been trying to sort of get a menu each time because of virtual meetings of like what bills are going to be or what items are going to be discussed. So obviously these two are on there. Harriet, is it still true? It's looks like this is maybe like the 7th and 8th thing on the discussion list. So
Correct.
the meeting starts at 4, but I would encourage everyone. You're not going to need to tune in right at 4. Let me put it that way. It won't come up. The first 30 minutes, these meetings typically are kind of getting the meeting in order. The governor's proclamation has to be voted on to allow for a virtual meeting. Then there are notes. There is the consent agenda that the commission still has to go through. Just for clarification, this is not on the consent agenda. This does get fully a full public hearing. And then council members are allowed to make comments on various items that are on the agenda at the front of the meeting if they desire. I won't be doing that on this. I'll be working on the actual when the actual items come up. But all that to say is, like, feel free to like keep an eye on it or open up a window, browser window to see the live stream sometime between 4 and 5. But my guess is like, and Harriet, you tell me if I'm wrong, but I would definitely say not before 5, but maybe more like 5:30. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I can't imagine that we'd be discussing it before 5.
Yeah. So just so everybody knows, I know everybody spent a lot of time on this. We're going to spend more time on it, and I want to try to hone it as best we can so that people aren't stuck kind of wondering what's going on. Harriet, is there in those items beforehand, is there anything, you don't have to name the item, but do you think the items beforehand are going to generate a decent amount of discussion too?
Oh, I'm not sure. I haven't looked. I haven't paid much attention to those besides my own.
That's fine. No, that's fine. I put you on the spot there. So again, yeah, probably definitely wait till 5, check in, see where things are. There are the phone numbers, or the phone number, the only phone number that's there for call in. I'll read it out in case folks are on who can't see the number. It's 629-255-1901. I'll say that one more time. It's 629-255-1901. And if you're not seeing the screen right now, you state your name, you state your address, support or oppose. I guess you could say if you're neutral too. And then you will get a 30-second warning. Somebody will kind of be on the phone, and sometimes it's a little jarring, so I want to make sure people know. You'll get a little 30-second warning. How much time do they get, Harriet? Is it 2 minutes?
2, yeah.
2. Okay, so if you want to prepare comments beforehand, you don't have to, but think about that 2-minute window. So, all right. I think we're pretty much there. As far as we've got everybody who asked questions, we've got the Q&A. Like I said, we will have another meeting between Planning Commission Thursday and Metro Council public hearing, which is March 2nd. So be on the lookout for that. Like I said, we're going to compare calendars after Thursday and kind of figure out where everybody is. So with that, I'll wrap us up. Thank y'all for staying engaged in this. Like I said, I know it's not easy on the time commitment side for anyone. And we can work through the additional questions we've got going forward. So thanks again, y'all. And I'm sure I will see/hear many of you on Thursday. Thanks again.